Hi, everyone. My name is Kyle Hume. I'm Director of PR and Communications over at Wattpad. I want to thank you all for joining us at our first event in a new series that we're launching called Wattpad Speaks. And we're kicking off that series with tonight's discussion of what it's like to be a Latinx writer today. So this is a very special one for us, and we're really happy to have you all here. This event is part of Wattpad's celebration of Hispanic and Latinx Heritage Month. We've had some wonderful initiatives this month, including a really fantastic reading list curated by Venezuelan-American Wattpad star Ariana Godoy. So be sure to check out that list and more of the ways we're celebrating Hispanic Heritage Month in a link that we're going to share in the chat. Before I pass things over to our wonderful moderator today, I wanted to take a moment to acknowledge the incredible contributions from the Hispanic and Latinx community on Wattpad. Of the more than 90 million people who make up our global community, more than 11 million are users in Spanish-speaking countries. In the US, where Hispanic and Latinx Heritage Month originated, more than 500,000 users have read stories from Spanish language writers in the past year alone. And globally, users spend an incredible 1.2 billion minutes each month reading millions of Spanish language stories, as well as thousands of stories from the US Wattpad community tagged Hispanic and Latinx. So we're thrilled to have journalist and editor Johanna Ferreira join us as moderator tonight. Johanna is the former deputy editor of Hip Latina and currently a freelance writer covering culture, identity, race, beauty, and wellness, often from a Latinx perspective. And her work has appeared in publications like the Oprah Magazine, Allure, Well and Good, Pop Sugar, and many other outlets. So with that, I will pass it over to Johanna. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much for having me, Kyle. I'd like to start off by introducing our very amazingly talented panelists. We have Shay Bravo, author of Historically Inaccurate, and V.S. Santoni, author of I'm a Gay Wizard and I'm a Gay Wizard, City of the Nightmare King. So here's how we're gonna play this out. We'll start off with the Q&A with both Shay and V.S., and then we're gonna jump right into audience questions that are gonna be submitted online. So you guys feel free to submit any additional questions with us throughout the discussion, either through the Zoom chat box, or via social media using the hashtag Wattpad Speaks. So we're gonna try to get through as many questions as possible, so please be patient with us. For now, we're gonna dive in. So I actually wanna start with how culture has influenced your craft. So this question goes out to both of you. What inspired you to write your stories, and how has your Latinx heritage influenced your writing and your storytelling? Who's going first?
I'll go first. Yeah, so growing up, I read a lot of science fiction and fantasy, and there was not a lot of, queer Latin representation. So, I think that, like they say that books are, mirrors, or they are windows, and I wanted a mirror. So as a Puerto Rican, I was kind of in between cultures. So I wanted to write about Latin kids that are like that, like in between cultures, underdogs, outcasts.
On my side, when I started writing on Wattpad, I would actually mostly write about white American characters, and it was when I started writing Historically Inaccurate that I kind of fully embraced my background. But I had always kind of written side characters, specifically from Mexico, or just Hispanic characters or Latinx characters. So Historically Inaccurate gave me an outlet to talk about how I grew up or certain experiences that I've had. So it's helped me out these last few years to write more Latinx characters as the forefront of my stories. And it's something that I hadn't dabbled into until a couple of years ago.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like you both noticed that there was a void, right, in literature when it came to representation of Latinx voices. So I want to dive into a little bit about diversity and the lack thereof in mainstream media and in books. So a new study actually found that while immigrant portrayals on TV have improved marginally since 2018, there's still significant work that needs to be done in order to achieve more accurate on-screen representation. With that said, why do you think Latinx representation in mainstream media and books is especially important today?
Yeah.
I think it's very important right now because personally, me growing up, whenever I would see TV shows or movies, a lot of what you get in immigrant stories are crime-related stories.
Yeah.
Whereas we are a part of one of the biggest parts of immigrants in this country, and we have regular jobs, we pay taxes, we do all these things, and then the media portrays us as like, oh, criminals, or um, kind of like the lower jobs and the like. And I think it's very important, and it has become more important to show us as we are regular people. And that has helped with the media in the recent years. I think there's still a lot of way to go. And I think shows are doing better now, and books specifically, there's a lot of better written, not written books, but just better books out in the market now that I'm very excited about. And yeah, I just think before it used to be taken as, again, criminals and all these other things. And now that we're more outspoken of our stories and what's going on, it's helping out a lot.
Yeah, I definitely have seen an improvement in how we're being portrayed because there's so many more Latinx voices out there. I think that makes a major difference. How do you feel your books have added or contributed towards this positive representation?
For me personally, I feel, I noticed from a recent review of Historically Inaccurate how they mentioned that Soledad's mom deportation is not the forefront. It's a big emotional toll on the main character, but it's not, it's something that happens in her life because it is something that happened in a lot of people's lives these days. And it shouldn't be portrayed as just, oh, that's what happens, and then the story ends. Because it really, it's about continuing on and finding your way in life. And I hope that can help kids that are going through similar things, just as an emotional help, really. And also just to know that we're here and we're trying to change things in this country. And even if it's telling little stories, hopefully it'll help.
I'm going to start this next question with VS. Can you share a bit about your books and the inspiration behind those stories? What themes or elements in your books drew from your Latinx heritage?
So obviously, yeah, Johnny, the main character in it, is like a third generation Latin kid. So he doesn't really identify with his culture too much. He doesn't even speak Spanish. And I just wanted that representation there for these like queer third generation Latin kids that they don't know where they fit in the world. They're looking for representation. They're looking for themselves in something. So that was kind of the inspiration, was to show, a kid like that. And creatively, I draw a lot from like Spanish surrealism, like Dali or like Frida Kahlo and stuff like that. I really like Spanish surrealism. I like putting it into a lot of my stories.
I really appreciated that you emphasize so much the third generation Latino, because I feel like even the second generation Latinx person is very underserved in the States, for sure, right? Like, we assume that like all Latinx here, like we all speak Spanish, we all visit our native countries, we're all deeply connected to our cultures, but that's not really the case for second and third generation. So I definitely feel like you definitely reached an important audience with that. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Shay, can you share a little bit about your book?
Yeah, Historically Inaccurate takes place in the life, again, of Soledad Gutierrez, and she is second generation. And she also feels this disconnect. There is a paragraph which kind of touches on violence in Mexico, where her dad tells her, oh, if you go visit your mom, they're gonna pick you out. And he kind of makes this offhand comment that, to me, my parents have made about me, even though I'm first generation. And she just feels trapped in a way because she is not, quote unquote, Mexican enough to be in Mexico, but she's also clearly not American enough in here. So I feel like a lot of us feels that sometimes, and I wanted that to be written as well.
Yeah, I think that's an important theme. I feel like that's very relatable for any Latinx person living in the States, regardless of if you're first, second, or third generation, that feeling of not being enough, whether it's American enough or Latinx enough. That's definitely like a common theme. that we experience. I wanted to ask you guys, I wanted to talk a bit about your actual characters and what inspired them and why it was important for you to make your characters Latinx. Whoever wants to take the mic.
Johnny's a lot like me when I was like 15. He's just a angsty, emo, little punk, Latin kid. And I always think like the question, like, why have a Latin character? Why not? Like they don't ask, why do you have to have a white character? Why, like no one ever asked that. So I'm like, of course I'm Latin. Why am I going to write anyone else? Like,
yeah, I agree with that.
For me, Soledad just it came easy to me. The moment that I started writing the page, I knew exactly who she was. They asked me about her name recently. They're like, oh, Soledad means loneliness and Sol means the sun. Did you think of like that name? And I answered, no, I just knew that was her name the moment I started.
That's so funny, yeah, because people were curious about that that confliction there and the meanings behind the name and the nickname. That's interesting.
Yeah, the moment she stepped on the page, I knew who this girl was, and her coping mechanism, which is dark humor and all these things that I use sometimes, especially in the situation she is on, and with her mom being gone and her trying to figure stuff out. They're problems that I've dealt with, not my mother being gone, but just missing someone. And I knew when I was writing it, I was like, okay, this is her story. I'm just going to tell it from my point.
I want to talk a bit about community. You guys have both found community within Wattpad. What inspired you guys to join and start writing on the platform? And what was that experience like for you guys? Can you kind of break it down for us a little bit for anyone who doesn't know?
Okay. I started writing on Wattpad a couple of days after a friend. I used to write my stories on a notebook and hand it out to my friends to read out. And one time a friend of mine goes, hey, you have a good story. Why don't you put it online? And I didn't know that sharing stories online was a thing. I didn't have a computer at home, so I wasn't aware of that. So she told me about Wattpad, and soon after my sister got a laptop. So I would borrow her laptop and like put some stories online. And then for my 15th birthday, which is when I started writing on Wattpad, I got a computer for my quinceañera gift because I didn't have a quinceañera. And so I started promoting my stories, and I tried a couple of accounts, and then I started writing the Teddy Bear Agreement, which took off. And from there on, it just went out. I made some friends, and I discovered that the community is super welcoming.
What about you, VS?
I was writing fan fiction on AO3 for a long time, and I was just looking for somewhere to post my original fiction. So yeah, when I looked it up, I found Wattpad, and I was like, oh, this is great. So I got on there, and like I got featured, and it went wild. Like people like really connected with that story.
That's amazing. You guys have both managed to turn your passion for writing into a way to make revenue as well. What does it mean to move from writing as a hobby to also to writing as a way of earning a living, of making money? How was that?
For me, it was really discombobulating because I wasn't really trying to become an author. I put it on Wattpad because I wanted to share it for free. So yeah, when you get thrown into like, because when you get thrown into the deep end of the pool, it's a lot of learning. So it's just been, having to like read a lot of blogs and just like learn a lot about this business.
What about you, Shay?
I kind of always wanted to be a writer ever since I started sharing my stories online, and actually getting a feed track on Wattpad on my old profile is what made me decide that I really did want to be an English major. So it was something that I always had in mind. I was like, oh, one day I might publish a book. But when they actually told me, hey, Historically Inaccurate won the Waddies, would you like your book to be published? It was a bit shocking because it was something I always wanted, and I've never thought it would really actually come true. So it was fantastic.
That's amazing. You guys inspire me because I still want to write a book. So kudos to you guys. I'm going to transition now to audience questions. It's going to be a mix of some of the questions that are coming in as well as some from social media. So I'm going to start with one from Litzy Acosta. Her question is, did you find it difficult to interpret Latinx culture into your writing?
I personally didn't. Like I said, sort of that came very easy to me. Her relationship with her father, some light machismo topics, or just her mother being away. There's all things that I've dealt with in my life. So it was easier for me to write it on paper when it came to my characters.
What about you, Vias?
I didn't really, focus on those things because I thought, why do I have to prove how Latin this character is? Like, he is Latin because that's who he is. Like, so.
And I think that's an important point because I feel like a lot of us, oftentimes, especially when we're creating art or we're sharing our stories, we feel that pressure to prove our Latinidad when in fact we don't have to. It's part of our DNA. This is who we are. It's us. So there's another question here. This is actually for you, VS. The question is, as a fellow LGBTQ minority race person, I've experienced a lot of frustration that I express through art. How has that experience been for you? Do you express yourself through your writing? Thank you so much for being here tonight.
Yeah, I think anyone that's ever read Gay Wizard knows that I express a lot of my frustration with being a queer person of color in Gay Wizard. My writing has always been a conduit for that, being stuck between worlds and then dealing with all the oppression that people who just aren't part of the mainstream mold fit into. So yeah, definitely my writing's a huge conduit for that kind of anger and frustration.
I hear that. This one is from Isabella Stevenson. I'm working on a story that has a second generation Latin character, and I was wondering, how can I make her character traits more accurate? Everything I do for her seems a little stereotyped.
Don't try so hard.
Yeah. Just let the character be who they are. Like, they don't have to be all the time just like talking about their struggles. They're just your character. They're a person. So,
speaking of which, how do you guys feel about the use of Spanglish in novels and stories? Do you guys have like a personal stance on that with your own writing?
So historically inaccurate, when I wrote the novel, there would be whole chunks of Spanish sometimes, which turned out to be kind of a strange topic because I would have people say, hey, don't do that because you're not going to reach a broader audience. And then people who would tell me, oh, that's great because it shows her Latino background. Again, I mostly just used whatever felt right for the character, but I did end up switching some of the Spanish back to English just to make sure that people felt included. But when it comes to Spanglish, I think it's a toss-up depending on your character. So one of Soledad's lines in the book is, Spanglish is my third language and I'm fluent at it. So I think it's just part of what you're writing depending on which stance you take.
I agree with Shay 100%.
Yeah, I feel that. So Yvonne actually asked a pretty fun question. Do you guys have a soundtrack or a playlist that goes with your books?
Yes, but it's very embarrassing and has lots of Paramore on it, so I don't let anyone see that soundtrack.
What about you, Shay?
So I usually just put a lo-fi or lo-fi music in the background, unless there's a specific song that is 100% the story, and I was like, oh, I really need this in it. Which I think I have one song. It's called "A Letter to My Younger Self." I don't remember the artist, but it's really good, and it's half in English, half in Spanish. I was like, oh, this is so through and through.
I love that. That's cute, and that name sounds familiar. Someone also asked if you can have any celebrities play your main characters, who would they be?
I'm not answering this one.
He's like, no.
No, okay. This is a messy question.
So
I could get messy. I could see that.
A whole lot of films and shows. I'm a book person through and through. However, I did answer this recently on Instagram. I wouldn't mind anyone as long as they represent the character well. Because I have a lot of a broad, diverse cast of character in Historically Inaccurate, and I wouldn't want any quote unquote whitewashing going on.
What
I
she
feel
said.
like I respect that that answer. All right, so I have a few more questions here. Oh, this is a good one. Is there a specific scene within your stories that you found particularly challenging to write, either because of a personal connection to the scene or because of the emotion you were aiming to evoke in writing it?
There's a hate crime in Gay Wizard in the beginning, and it was really intense to write because I drew a lot from my past. So yeah, it was a rough thing to write.
Wow.
For me, the deportation scene from Historically Inaccurate was very, very hard to write, only because of the emotions I was trying to invoke, as well as some of the fears I've had throughout my life. And yeah, it was hard.
Somebody wrote, I'm only half Hispanic and I feel like I relate to what Shay said. I'm not Hispanic enough to visit our home country, but I'm not American enough to fit in here. How did you cope with this kind of stuff?
I try to embrace the things that I liked from both cultures, because when I came to the US, I had to go through English learning classes, and even then I felt inadequate in both sides. So reading helped me out a lot, finding my own taste in music and stuff, just trying to find the balance between them two, because you don't have to be 50-50 and you don't have to be 100 and 100. As long as you find peace within yourself and your own culture, it should be good enough for you.
Yeah. VS?
I've never had a hard time. Like, I'm not like my family's really into Hibaro, like kind of like hillbilly Spanish stuff. And I've just never really like had a hard time just being like, I'm Puerto Rican. I was born in Puerto Rico. I still speak Spanish. I speak English. So I've never really had that kind of like that problem where I'm like, questioning. So I realized that's more of like a states thing.
Definitely. Definitely.
So yeah, that's never been something I've been through, but just don't worry about it because you're Latin enough for the Latins and you're American enough for the Americans. They both want you.
All right. So the next question is, someone wrote, what is your current binge read? What are you guys reading right now that you highly recommend?
So I am still in the middle of an audiobook, and it's called Clap When You Land. And
Yes.
I just forget her name. But
Elizabeth Acevedo.
Acevedo, yes, I knew it started with an A. It's so good. I've personally never really read The Poet X, but just hearing this book really wants to make me read it. So that's what I'm currently hearing / reading at the moment.
Yeah, she's a fun read because she writes in prose.
Yes.
So you're reading fiction in poetry almost. It's really cool.
Yes, it's super cool.
Oh, cool. Somebody said, we're getting some pretty cool comments from folks. Someone said, yes, readers do connect with writers who are authentic and write from their experiences and their heart. That's Celeste Almodovar. And then Shelley Burbank wrote, I'm trying to learn Spanish 30 years after high school Spanish classes. We definitely are cheering you on with that. That's really admirable to be trying to learn Spanish 30 years later.
Heck yeah.
So I have another question for you guys. This is actually a question I have, is what advice would you give to young Latinx folks who want to get into publishing, want to get into writing, want to share their stories, don't really know how to begin?
I would say keep at it. Like, stay working at it all the time because like that persistence is the key in publishing. Like, you just have to be persistent like all the time.
I would say don't be scared to write, because I know how intimidating it can be, especially when you have big publishers or like big author names. Like, you don't feel, or at least I didn't feel like I was a writer enough a lot of the time, but it's my story and I get to shape it whichever way I want. So don't be scared of writing or thinking that your story is not good enough, because it is good enough.
VS, this is a question for you. Were you also an English language learner? It's amazing that Shay went from English language learner to published author in English. VS, what was your experience with with speaking and living both languages essentially?
Yeah, so I was born in Puerto Rico. I was born in Caguas, and I didn't know English when I moved to America. I had to go to like a special like English program in elementary school to learn English. So yeah, it was the same thing with me. Like where like I didn't realize why the kids were making fun of like the way I spoke like until I was older and I like really processed like who I was and my identity and languages.
How was that in terms of like, when did you start building confidence writing in English creatively?
I never really doubted myself. I just like I loved writing, and but like I took to writing like a fish really when I was a kid. I just took to it really fast. So I just started writing. Honestly, I've never really been 100% confident in my writing. I don't think any writer is 100% confident in their
Yeah, we
writing.
always feel like we can improve for sure.
Yeah, like I'm always trying to improve my craft. So when I wrote Gay Wizard, I was like, I'm not a good enough writer to write a book. But you just got to do it because someone wants to read that story, and you'll find your audience.
Are there any any Latinx authors right now that you guys, recommend our followers or our folks tuning in tonight to check out? I know VS, we were talking a little bit before we started the panel about how there's more Latinx fantasy fiction authors. Are there any you'd recommend folks check out?
Sylvia Moreno Garcia.
Oh
She
yeah.
came out with Mexican Gothic. Aiden Thomas came out with Cemetery Boys, really cute trans YA with a trans Latin rep, which is really rare. Like Adam Silvera, Benjamin Alidri Husseins. There's so many. There's one that came out recently. It was a Puerto Rican book, Blaze Wrath Games. I think that is Amparo Ortiz. There's a lot of like Latin fantasy coming out now.
Which is exciting, right? Because a few years back there wasn't as many, right? I didn't even know until this year that there were Latinx fantasy fiction writers. That's super exciting. Shay, anybody you want to put us on to?
So I'm terrible with names in regular life, but some of the books that I've been reading and loving is I'm Not Your Perfect Mexican Daughter, which I'm reading in Spanish. I am also reading With the Fire on High, and again, Clap When You Land, and I'm always trying to expand my library for more Latinx writers.
I love that you're reading in Spanish. In fact, somebody asked, have you guys ever thought about writing in Spanish, since that was your first languages?
Yes, I've thought about it, and it's something that kind of, like when English writing kind of something scares me because I came to the US when I was turning 12. So I missed a lot of the whole grammar lessons. So a lot of, whenever I write in Spanish, I kind of second guess myself a lot. But I had dreams of one day maybe Historically Inaccurate being in Spanish out there.
I have rough drafts of all my stories on Wattpad in Spanish too, like because I've written them all in Spanish too. Yeah, but I'm not confident in writing it that well, so I haven't put any of them up. But I have all of them there because I'm like, I really want to speak to my Latin readers so bad because they're always commenting. They're like, no puedo leer esto, and I'm like, oh, I want to talk to you so bad.
I feel like it's a matter of time, VS, because if you already got those drafts in Spanish, it's a matter of time before you release the book in Spanish, which is really exciting. And actually, we've gotten a couple of comments about that. Somebody wrote, I'm so impressed by people who learn a new language and then write really well in it. Bravo to both of you, totally impressed. And there's another question for you guys. One of my Latinx characters has the emotional struggle of her father being deported. And I was wondering if I should take that part out. What do you guys say to that?
I don't think you should, especially emotional struggles in all characters are things that happen in writing. But it's something that also happens in real life. Like I said, in my story, Soledad's mother is deported. And in real life, we have thousands of people being deported or held in camps. So it's something that happens in real life. And if that's something that you started writing because it spoke to you, you should totally keep it.
VS?
She's correct.
One of the things that that's come up for me, hearing about your books is I think it's really important that you guys bring up themes and topics that, you know, our community experiences but might be ashamed to talk about, right? So for instance, Shay, your book, you know, touches on deportation. Unfortunately, that's still a topic in our country that can be considered taboo, but it's also not something to be ashamed of, right? Like, it is something that we should be having more dialogues around. And VS, I love that you know, as dark and difficult as it is, that your book has a hate crime scene, because I think that that gives opportunity for us to talk about things like that within our community. Because I feel like within the Latinx community, when we talk about like hate crimes or racism or homophobia or transphobia or colorism, it's still difficult sometimes to have those dialogues within the Latinx community, with our parents, with our grandparents, with our aunts and uncles, even with people of our generation. So what advice would you give to folks who, you know, they don't know how to, you know, approach folks in their community or in their family about these topics that are affecting them and affecting our community?
You know, I've had to cut people out of my life because, you know, like you said, our community is very old-fashioned sometimes. Latin people, especially parents, can be very old-fashioned sometimes.
Yep.
That's one of the reasons why home, like found family is such a big theme in all my stories, because we have to find the people that we don't need to explain things to. They'll just understand us. So you can, you know, I don't think anything should be taboo off the table, you know, with deportation and the way they're putting people in these camps. Like, why is that taboo? Like, it's taboo
Right.
because people are uncomfortable talking about the realities of what this means for this country, this dark path we're on. You know, I don't want to talk to anyone who I have to feel ashamed to bring up things to.
I hear that. Shay?
I feel like I've also had to end discussions with some people, but for example, when it comes to my personal family, it's more of educating. I know when I first told my mother that Historically Inaccurate not only deals with deportation and family issues, but also with LGBTQ issues and how it's handled. She wasn't surprised. She just says like, "Oh, but there's nothing like sexual about it." And like, what? So I thought that was strange. So I had to explain to her. I'm like, Mom, we're just people. Okay? Like it just happens. That's just life. Just because you include LGBT characters in it doesn't mean that there's like weird quote unquote sex stuff going on. So she's gotten a lot better from when I was growing up and stuff. And I think both of my parents, because my parents were like strong Mexican kind of parents and like taught all these things. But my mom and my dad, they've been doing amazing. So I think education and just slowly talking to the people in your life it's fantastic, and it helps out a lot sometimes. Obviously, if it doesn't help, then there should be more things, but I think it's very important to educate people.
So we have a couple of interesting questions coming up. One of them is from Sawyer, and they ask, when does writing about certain issues like immigration or deportation become a trope or a trauma fetish?
I think, oh, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to mention, I think a lot of media tries to dramatize it a lot. They just try to like, oh, look at this terrible thing that happened in this show. And a lot of the time it doesn't bring anything to the show aside from that, the whole scene of pain, and that's it. And I think it's still important to talk about it, like I mentioned earlier about the deportation scene in Historically Inaccurate, but it should also be reminded that the characters they're still like living on and like trying to figure out their lives. So I think media should just handle it better. It's not something that should be erased, but it's not something that should be glorified.
I think like American Dirt too, like we should talk about Janine Cummins because we're going to talk about like, you know, this trauma porn. Like, yeah, when Janine Cummins comes along and writes this thriller where all that's like this like flavorful backdrop, you know, that's a problem. That's trauma porn. Okay, when we're talking about our authentic lived experiences and deportation happens to be an aspect of that authentic lived experience, I'm not trying to sensationalize my life for you. I'm just telling you where I'm coming from. So it's just context is completely different.
I think that's key, like authentic lived experience. If it's your truth and it's part of your story, you know, it's important to tell it. But I think, you know, with books like American Dirt, this is someone who, you know, hasn't actually experienced this, doesn't really understand the community and their struggles. So that's when it does become trauma porn. Actually, we have another question related to this topic in particular. What was the audience's reaction or readers' reaction to the deportation in Shay's book and their reaction to the hate crime in VS's book? These can be controversial topics, and I'm just curious how people have responded to those scenes in the books. Have you guys gotten any feedback or commentary? Positive, negative?
Sorry. I get a couple, and most of them are positive in the sense of I've gotten a couple of people who's like, oh, you made me cry. But nobody has said anything like, oh, you shouldn't have included this. Most people kind of understand that's just part of Soledad's life. And I'm glad that it's been positive. Whenever there's criticism in the book, it really doesn't focus on that. It focuses mostly on like other certain scenes or topics touched. But I'm glad that at least the deportation and just Soledad being who she is something that's resonated with a lot of people.
Yes.
Back when I first published, I didn't really think about putting a content warning in there. So I would go back and do it now, yeah. So I had a cancel brigade, you know, get on my Goodreads and one-star me and say I was, you know, doing this, that, the other. They're you know, trying to say I was trying to sensationalize it or whatever it was. And then I've had some people recently that have talked about how much because these are struggles we go through in the community, it helps them identify with the story. And when they see that scene, as painful and agonizing as that scene is, that pain resonates with them. They know I'm not coming at it from a place of, you know, malice or spite. I'm like trying to make you understand this pain.
And it resonates. What kind of changes beyond representation would you guys like to see in mainstream books, films, and television shows in 2021? How do you hope what's popular will evolve?
I just want people to include more people from all backgrounds more, because I feel like, yes, we're doing better at representation, but it should just be natural to give whoever the cast is, as long as you're good for the character, it should be good. Unless that character was written specifically for certain roles, but even then, just include more people, just be more open to it.
I agree. Like, I hope that every level of the entertainment infrastructure has people of color and all kinds of diversity in there. I want agents that are people of color and queer people. I want, you know, like, you know, studio execs, all kinds of these random people. You know, if the bone structure of the industry changes, then the industry will change.
Right, absolutely. Someone's asking, are there any writing projects you guys are currently working on now that you can give us a little taste of?
I'm working on Gay Wizard 3, so you'll probably see that like in the next month or two, like on Wattpad.
Oh wow, that's soon.
Yeah.
We'll definitely
Yeah, I force myself to write really fast. It's painful, but I force myself to like plug out books really, really fast.
We're gonna actually, I'd like to get back to that, VS, after Shay answers. I want to tackle that for a second.
Awesome. I am writing 2 projects. I'm writing my high fantasy project, which is high fantasy. Hopefully it will be 3 books, but I'm not sure if it will be. And I am also writing what I like to call my Wattpad romance stories, which is what I usually write on Wattpad. And it is a road trip book through the Midwest of the USA, because I lived there for a long time, 2 years. And it is actually an LGBTQ book, as I recently came out as bisexual. And it's just tackling some of the feelings I've had in life.
I love that. I love that. Somebody just, well, actually, let me get back to the writing process. I really want to talk about that. So what, and I'm going to ask VS this first, since you already touched on this. What is your writing process like? Do you guys dedicate like an hour a day, or, you know, I'm going to write a certain amount of pages or chapters a week? Like, what's your process? Like, how are you guys able to get this done and meet whatever deadlines or goals you guys give yourselves?
So I don't have as much of a writing process as I have a writing train wreck. I don't have a very healthy work-life balance. I just like get in there and I force myself to marathon write, and I do sprints a lot. So I'm not the best person to ask this question because I don't have a good balance when it comes to working on books
But
and
you
stuff.
write quickly. How do you manage that?
I wrote a book in 14. I wrote because I was trying to like beat the NaNoWriMo thing. I wrote a book in 14 days recently, and that was agonizing.
Was
Um,
that like day after day? Was
Yes,
that
I wrote consecutively 3,000 words every day for like 14 days straight. And it's just, it was intense. It's really hard.
yeah?
But you just have to tell yourself, I can do this. It's, you love to write. It's what you want to do. So just get there and put your mind to it and just do it.
Are you the kind of writer, VS, that you have to like go into isolation? Like I have a few friends that have published books and they like have to like go away and like
Yes.
stay at a hotel. Yeah,
Yes,
that's
I cannot be around anyone. I get so irritated. You don't want to be around me when I'm writing. So
Shay, what about you? What's your writing process?
So I'm what I like to call the middle of between a planner and a pantser, because I will jot down some points in the notebook and then write 3 pages, and there's like, oh yeah, I had a point that I had to get to. Um, I work at a cafe, and I used to love to go to coffee shops pre-COVID and just book out a whole afternoon, and I can
I
just
miss those days.
yeah, but what I've been doing now is just I'll go to work a couple of hours before I actually start. Since again, I work at a cafe, so it's slightly easier, and I'll just be writing on my laptop. I don't write as fast as I used to, but I like to think that now my writing's a little bit better than what it used to be. But yeah, I wish I could just write a whole book in 14 days.
no, you don't.
So
No,
we've gotten some interesting questions here. Hold up, I'm trying to scroll back. Oh, I don't think I can actually. Someone had asked a question I'm remembering off the top of my head. They said that they're white, and how important is it for them to include diverse characters in their story? How do you guys feel about that?
I think as long as you're writing from a place of authenticity, it's fine. I mean, I'm not ever going to be the kind of person that's like, you can't write this, you can't write that. Like, as long as you're being, true to yourself and you're being genuine with the characters and you treat them with love, um, yeah, go for it.
Yeah, mine is something similar to that, as long as you're doing your research, because as I've mentioned before, Latinx people come from all types of backgrounds, and we're all very different, come from different countries, or parents come from different countries in the case that you're second, third, or whatever. Just do your research, be respectful. It's like any other character. If you're gonna write an Asian character or someone from the Middle East, as long as you do your research and you're respectful, you should be okay. It doesn't matter that you're a white writer.
Someone's going back to the writing process and work schedule, and they're like, what advice do you have for writers who are still currently students? I'm assuming because they might not have as much time to write.
So I wrote my longest book, which was at the time the Teddy Bear Agreement, while I was a college student. And a lot of the time I was writing sitting on the floor outside of my classroom. So
oh, wow.
Yeah, you can, well, quote unquote, you can make time sometimes, as long as you're balance it well with, sorry, I live right next to an airport. You balance it well with your health. So your health, your mental health should come first. But if you get time to like write on a notebook or just type away in your iPad, any time is good writing time.
VS?
I started writing after college because, like I said, I don't have good balance with these things. Like, I would go one way or the other, and it would not be good either way.
I hear that. So here's a few comments we're getting. Someone wrote, I'm writing a story and I'm trying my best to add characters of all backgrounds and sexualities. So I'm really thankful for all the advice that I'm getting from y'all. Yeah. And then someone else wrote, thank you for that in regards to your response to the white writer. I was just wondering because of the comments made about American Dirt. Yeah, I do think that was an important question to ask because, as we talk more about diversity and, we analyze and we criticize like, white writers that are not creating enough diversity in their cast or in their characters, it is important that if they are going to include folks of color that they authentically understand our experiences. But also when it comes to film and television is hiring more brown and Black writers, right? In the writer's room. I think that's really key, honestly, versus them writing it. Because that's where we've really seen the difference, like with shows like Gentefied. So yeah, actually I have one more question for you guys. I know you guys write books, but in terms of like television or film, are there any programs or series that speak to the Latino experience that you feel they're doing right? You guys look really fun.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, like I mentioned before, I'm not a very big movie and TV person, so I don't know if I'm like an expert in talking about this. I do see that some people like shows like Jane the Virgin or oh God, I can't remember the one that I was talking about. But there's I think an Amazon Prime show or something about a family that's going through deportation and how they handle that. But I think like you mentioned, as long as they're hiring more people that actually go through the stuff, there should be better shows and movies coming out.
VS?
I think we like I noticed the Party of Five came back out. They did a redo of Party of Five, and
That's
it was
right.
it was all Latin. I was like, that's amazing. Like when I saw that earlier, I was like, I freaked out about that. And they redid Charmed, and it was all Latin too. So like I've watched those, and like they have like those little like slips in there. So like if you're Latin, you kind of get the nods and stuff like that. But I feel like most of these shows too, I tend to find Latin writers. When I look at the IMDb, I see a lot of them, like that show Love Victor. I have a lot of issues with that show, but the Latin rep was really good. So I feel like the Latin rep I've seen lately is pretty good in most of these shows, Gentefied and stuff like that.
Yeah, I really like the way season 1 of Gentefied was, and actually they were renewed for a second season, so I'm excited to see how that comes out. Sawyer wrote, "I'm queer myself, but I struggle to write my characters and accurately portray the complexity of finding your identity. I don't want to lay it on too thick and pull away from the main plot, but I think it's important to discuss. I struggle to find the words. Any advice?"
I think you just have to write what you want to write. And I think if you worry too much about being too plotty or being too this or being too that, you're not going to find your readers. You've got to find the people that are going to like what you have to say. So I would say, focus on what you want to in your story, because it's your story at the end of the day.
Shay, do you have anything you want to comment?
Yeah, I agree with that. Just write what you think it's right, and at the end, find your people along the way.
Holly Corfield wrote, "In both books, there is a great representation of relationships in all forms, romantic, platonic, and family. Can you guys speak to the importance of featuring all of these variations of love and support?"
I really feel like we need to focus a lot more on platonic love. I feel like platonic love isn't something we really talk about a lot in a society. I feel like romantic love is very centered. I wanted Allison and Johnny to have this really loving, affectionate, platonic friendship that's full of hugs and all the stuff that, romantic couples do. Like they're basically a married couple, but they're not. Like we have friends like that in our lives, so I feel like that needs to be represented more, and we need to decenter romantic love so much.
I totally agree with that. Shay?
Yeah, I think like all relationships are important, especially like friendships and family relationships. For example, Soledad has her dad with her, and even when they don't talk as much or he's just like working, he shows her that he cares. Like he gives her a good morning kiss on the cheek, and he makes sure that she's all right. He asks her a lot. And Soledad has a best friend, his name is Carlos, and they have this very close relationship. And throughout the book, when I was writing it on Wattpad, people would start typing. I was like, oh, I ship Carlos and Sol more than I do the main couple. And I was like, yeah, but it's not that way, because you also have friends that are close like that. Or her and other best friend, Diane, they're also very close. And I think that's very important to show through friendships.
Yeah, no, I think that's especially important, especially in our culture, like Via said, that just tends to highlight and you know, glorify romantic relationships versus like platonic or friendships. I think that's super important. I really appreciated this dialogue, you guys. Like, I feel like, you know, even though we spoke before today, I feel like I myself learned so much. I feel like a lot of folks have learned a lot and gotten a lot from this dialogue. Someone here even wrote, Jimena wrote that up until now, I felt I didn't belong, guilty for writing in English, as my voice came out better that way, and quivering about including my Latin roots in my stories. I can't thank you enough for giving me back my confidence, and that we are all going to be okay as long as you remain your authentic self. And then Shelley wrote, this was great, all of you thoroughly enjoyed it. So thanks so much, guys. I want to just give a big shout out and a big thank you to our very talented and awesome panelists. Thank you everyone who joined us tonight. We're so glad to have had the chance to discuss Latinx representation in literature with you all, because it's a really important dialogue to have. And for more ways to celebrate Hispanic Heritage Month with Wattpad, click the link that they're gonna drop in the chat, and stay tuned for more. Thanks so much, guys. Thanks again. I'm definitely gonna, I'm finishing off a couple of books that I'm reading, so you guys, they're here. You guys are next. So I'll let you guys know how I love it. Thanks again, everybody. Have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Bye.
much.